Hey there, Dmitry Vorontsov here at Superstar Screenwriters. Thanks for stopping by. This is probably not a coincidence that you are watching this video, but even if you stumbled on it accidentally, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because this video is all about coincidences, and more specifically about the problem of the coincidence in storytelling. So coincidence in storytelling is not a bad thing in itself. Coincidence is allowed in stories because coincidences happen in real life all the time. The coincidence only becomes a bad thing in storytelling if it's not used in a correct dramatic way. If the coincidence is not justified by the story material, and the writer simply didn't notice that a certain situation is a result of a coincidence, that usually ends up with coincidence being an author's error. But if the coincidence is included in the story as a meaningful element that helps drive a certain point home, if it's treated as a legitimate dramatic technique, if the story is built in such a way that the coincidence can play a role in it, if the coincidence is dramatized, if the author deliberately uses coincidence as a dramatic device, then the coincidence can work really well and add strong fun factor to the story. Have you seen Pulp Fiction? Do you remember how many coincidences are there in that movie? It's filled with coincidences, at least a dozen of big major coincidences in one film, but that probably doesn't bother you at all, right? Because the coincidences in that film are used dramatically correctly. They are part of that story's style and even its philosophy. Accidents or coincidences can be legitimately used in stories for quite a number of reasons, and I will try to list a few of them. 1. Plausibility. Accidents and coincidences do occur in real life all the time, and so adding a lifelike coincidence makes a story paradoxically more plausible. But it has to be done in a certain way. Usually, you would have to somehow make a big deal out of the fact that this is a total coincidence or an accident. You, the author, will have to be the first one to call it out. You have to point out to your audience that this is a coincidence. This technique, author's awareness, works always very well when you need to justify something in your story, for example, a coincidence or any other seemingly implausible or even fantastical thing. It's like you would say to the reader or to the audience, look, this is improbable and I am aware of it, but that's what happened, what can I do? If you're the first one to call it out, the audience will accept it. 2. Another way to treat a lifelike coincidence as plausible is to provide the character's dramatic reaction to the coincidence. The way it was done, for example, in Pulp Fiction, when Butch stops at an intersection, and who does he see crossing the street? The very guy who's been trying to hunt him down and kill him. And then both men display the most dramatic reaction to such a coincidence. The character's reaction serves as a substitute for the author's reaction. In this case, the characters call it out. 3. A variation, dismissive calling out. A character may call out the coincidence as a big deal, but another character may dismiss it. Yeah, it was a coincidence, so what? Things happen, big deal. This is an elegant technique that also allows you to get away with coincidences in your story. 4. You can also think of a coincidence from the philosophical, absurdist or existentialist point of view. You can create a noticeable, glaring coincidence that dramatically changes somebody's destiny, or even lead to the death of a prominent character, or in some cases quite the opposite, the character survives seemingly inevitable death by sheer coincidence. When it is dramatic like that and the character acts somehow awed by the event or marks it somehow with a pause for reflection, the coincidence may be dramatically justified. Pulp Fiction has that too, and so does Alfred Hitchcock movie Psycho, which if you haven't seen it, I most sincerely recommend because it's amazing. Some drastic coincidences there, and one of them was quoted by Quentin Tarantino in Pulp Fiction. 5. A variation on the philosophical justification, calling out the coincidences, but in the dialogue. We can think of the entire existence of the universe as a coincidence, and our own existence in the universe as a coincidence as well. What if the meteor that killed all the dinosaurs was delayed by a few minutes, or came a few minutes early? It would have missed Earth by thousands of miles, and the dinosaurs would probably still roam the Earth. What if our parents decided against having sex on the particular day when you or I were conceived? We would not have existed. This kind of dialogue. 6. Religious view of the coincidence. From a religious standpoint, there is no such thing as the coincidence, but only destiny. Everything happens for a reason, and that reason is God's will, or the way of Tao. Chinese dramatic writing, including screenwriting, often works with this type of coincidence, something that may appear to be a coincidence, but is really a force of destiny. Usually, these types of coincidences are big and bold, massive coincidences that lead to life-changing consequences. 7. Pre-established coincidence or accident, or coincidence or accident revealed as such much later. Here we play with the timing. You may set up the circumstances that make the coincidence plausible long before the event that involves the coincidence even takes place in your story. An example of that is used in one of Lee Child's novels about Jack Reacher. A very talented series of pulpy escapist novels, and I don't even particularly regret the time I wasted on them, but I don't remember which one specifically uses this technique. If you know which one it is, please do mention it in the comments. So in that novel, Jack Reacher gets out of a plane in Paris and goes to a meeting, and he casually mentions that the day is cold and terribly windy. Much later on that day, several chapters later, Jack Reacher with a group of other characters is visiting the Eiffel Tower, and suddenly he hears a faint, distant shot. And several seconds later, a character standing a few steps away from him drops dead. It was an assassination by a sniper. So Reacher investigates the murder for half the novel afterwards, and eventually discovers, to his dismay, that it was he, Reacher, who was supposed to become the assassin's victim. But because it was a windy day, the wind blew the bullet off its course and it hit a different person instead of him. In this example, we see that the coincidence is pre-established, mentioning that the day was windy. And then the coincidence at first does not even seem like the coincidence, but a deliberate murder, and only later it's revealed as one. Then the writer justifies it further by the protagonist's inner monologue. 8. Extremely undesirable coincidence. If the characters are in a situation when things are very volatile and must not go wrong, and that is being expressed either in the dialogue through action or both, and then things do go wrong by a coincidence, and the situation dramatically explodes through explosive escalation, this coincidence may be justified and very powerful. For example, if a group of characters are locked in a room where there was a gas leak, and one of them says that the worst thing that can happen now is if there's a spark, and just at that moment somebody reaches for an electrical switch, and the other character screams out, "No!" but it's too late. The other character flips the switch, there's an electric spark, and the place becomes a fireball filled with burning, screaming people. A coincidence, but it was called out as undesirable, and because undesirable things do happen in life, it's the law of the universe, it seems, this coincidence becomes plausible. Just our luck, or speak of the devil type of coincidence. Or something like characters are rushing to get somewhere in a car very fast, and it's snowing heavily, and one of them says, "I just hope we don't hit a patch of ice on the pavement at the speed we're going." And the other character tells him, "Never, you hear me, never say things like that. What we think and what we say affects our reality. If you talk about the patch of ice, you can bring it into existence." And then sure enough, right at this moment, we should see the patch of ice approaching, and sure enough, the car slides on it, skids off the highway, and crashes. 9. The coincidence itself is not as important as how characters react to it. As long as their reaction reveals something about them as characters, the coincidence can work. Life is full of coincidences. It's what we do with them what counts. A character walks down the street and by sheer coincidence he witnesses a robbery. That character may run away, maybe a coward, maybe a very rational, reasonable person, especially if that character calls the police and informs them of the robbery in progress. Or that character may run to help the persons being robbed, revealing that that character is recklessly courageous or too impulsive. If we emphasize the character reaction, pinpointed, the coincidence comes unnoticed. And finally, 10, simple dramatization of the coincidence. This should probably have been the first item on this extremely imperfect list. If the coincidence is in some way, in any way, made very dramatic, it can work. If it leads to any kind of dramatic consequences, if it changes the world of the story in a significant way, if it results in some kind of dramatic reaction, it may be acceptable. One of the best examples can be found in Romeo and Juliet. In the play, as you may remember, Juliet takes a sleeping potion that makes it seem as if she died. Father Lorenzo sends a messenger to tell Romeo that Juliet is not actually dead. But the messenger misses Romeo because of the outbreak of the plague. He's not allowed to town where Romeo is hiding. So Romeo believes that Juliet is dead, and he kills himself, and then she wakes up and kills herself. This is a dramatized coincidence. A simple coincidence, tragic, absurd, and it leads to most drastic consequences. Truth be told, both Romeo and Juliet are portrayed as highly impulsive, unthinking people, so how they behave as a result of a coincidence is also justified by what they are as characters. Shakespeare also does a really cool little thing there. Early in the story, when Mercutio is mortally wounded, he exclaims, "A plague of both your houses." So it may be argued that Shakespeare possibly retroactively added that line to pre-justify the coincidence and make it seem as a result of Mercutio's curse, or as a destiny. So, I hope you like this little story. If you did, you know the drill. Please like, comment, hit subscribe button, all that fun stuff. Signing off now, this was Dmitry Vorontsov, broadcasting from New York's superstar screenwriters headquarters. I'm wishing you great success in all your creative endeavors.